kinds of places. And we, and we do our work and our lives in all different kinds of settings. It's wonderful to be able to have spaces like this in which we can come together. And I want to say I'm very honored because I see some people here who I consider my teachers, colleagues, friends, and some folks I don't know so well. And I'm not really here with, a set agenda of answers to this big question. I'm here to share some of my experiences, which include some of the places where I'm actually kind of stuck, and I don't think I've figured it out by any means. And then after I speak for a bit, we'll open it up, and not just for questions for me, but maybe you'll all have some thoughts that we can share with each other as we're trying to figure out this moment, this particular terribly dark moment in time. And I would say so let me say that I've been a congregational rabbi at CBST for 32 years. And I came to CBST in 1992 at the height of the AIDS crisis. And for those of you who remember that time, for those of us in the LGBT community, those were 16 years in which the diagnosis of AIDS was a death sentence. There were 16 years that we had no medications, no therapies to help. And of course, there's still no vaccine, but now there are therapies that make it a chronic, lifelong disease if you have access to healthcare. But for 16 years, if you got the diagnosis, it was a death sentence. And the death usually took place within a year. So we, as a community here in New York, and for those in urban centers, it was extremely, there's no way to overstate how acute and what a sense of siege the LGBT community experienced, a hostile government, no support from the larger Jewish community. It was a very, very bleak time. And I learned, so I came to CBSC in 1992. The AIDS crisis really emerged. This is a quick version just to give a sense of, because a lot of what I know, I learned from that. And I want to honor the gay men in that time who taught me so much, and the coming together of lesbians and gay men who were not a united community before AIDS. And what we learned together then continues to teach me, even in this situation, many, many years later, when the world is a completely different place. So AIDS really became visible, not with the word AIDS, but in 1981. So from 1981 to 1997, there were no real therapies. And I came to CBST in 1992. So I was really in the middle of the crisis moment. I was the first rabbi that CBST had, and 40% of our synagogue died from AIDS. 40% of the synagogue died from AIDS. And again, no support from the larger Jewish community and no government or larger political support. So a few things I learned from that time. And then, of course, I was a congregational rabbi through 9/11 in New York City, and our synagogue is about a mile away from the World Trade Center. So we were very much kind of at that ground zero. We were at ground zero by being a New York gay community through the AIDS crisis, ground zero for 9/11. And then, of course, we were all ground zero for COVID, right? But New York felt particularly, especially the early months of COVID, where New York was hit so hard, so fast, and so quickly. It again felt very reminiscent of those two other major crises. And I've been a congregational rabbi through those three. So that's what I'm drawing from. And it's just my personal experience. All of you might have very, very different ones. And also, I'm speaking as a congregational rabbi. I know not all of you are congregational rabbis and function in other rabbinic or cantorial settings. This is what my experience is. So I did a session with Midwest Academy when I was working at the Religious Action Center in 1980 or 1990, which is, the how shall we say, the gold standard of organizing training in the United States, started by Saul Alinsky way back when, and Heather Booth ran it for many years. And in the Midwest Academy, I met Kim Bobo, who is one of the great religious organizers of our time. She's a Christian, very important Christian organizer. And she taught me then that in a congregational setting, we had to think about progressive or social justice work in three barrels or three something containers or three something. I don't know what the word is exactly. And I have used this model for everything I have done at CBST since then. And it has also been functional for me through this time. So it's kind of a framework I use. One is that in a congregational setting, when you're taking a social justice issue, you have to pursue it through these three different angles. One is social service. There are people who have an appetite, and I'm going to take this as a simple example, hunger in America, simple, right? Some people have an appetite to work on social service, direct service kinds of ways to express their social justice commitments, working in a soup kitchen, working in a food pantry, that kind of thing. That would be an example. The next category is education/prayer. How do we teach people about what hunger in America looks like? How do we make sure our people are knowledgeable, have information? How do we integrate it into our prayer life, into our religious expression of commitments? And the third big area is advocacy. How do we get involved in political activism that makes the reason we had to do the other things not necessary, right? How would we advocate on Capitol Hill or in Albany in New York's case or wherever to change laws to make things better? So those categories I look at for all the different work I do at CBST about anything that comes up related to social justice. How do I make sure it's integrated into the education and spiritual life of the community? How do I educate or make sure education takes place? And how do we get involved on advocacy? And in my experience, congregants have appetites for one of those, rarely for more of them each. And that way you can say to somebody, if you have an appetite for social direct service kind of work, that's as important as advocacy or the other things. So that's just a framework I just wanted to share with you because it's been important for me through all of these crises. One of the things I deeply learned from AIDS is the power of communal support for each other. So we created in COVID time, as soon as COVID happened, we created a natural framework for volunteers in the congregation to every week call every single member of the congregation, divided up. Everybody had, 10 to 20 people to call to just check in and say, how are you doing? That check-in call transforms the culture of the institution more than anything else I do, more than any fancy sermons, more than any great ideas I have, more than any brilliant insights. People feeling like somebody in the congregation, and it can't be me, we have a big congregation, I can't make all those calls, but I helped to create a framework by which the congregation feels checked in. So how did that translate into this time? What we did is that we made a list. One of the things that we did, and again, you'll see this, how it fills out that framework that I just gave you. So we made a list of everybody we thought in the congregation who would be particularly in pain. We didn't call everybody in the congregation. We did create some spaces by which the congregation could come and express their pain, where we would recite Tehillim and sing some songs and then create space for just to express themselves. But then the next step is that we made a list of everybody in the congregation who had some personal reason to be in particular pain about this, besides, just being Jewish and being a sentient human being with a heart. That of course, we're all in pain. But you know what? There are people in the congregation, as we all know, who are particularly more deeply triggered, affected, heartbroken, in deep pain. And we, as the clergy at CBST, we made a list of who those people are. And we made sure they're being checked in on some every couple of weeks. But certainly when it started happening, we were calling all of them just to check in. And by the way, we have people with very different political views. And my feeling is, if you can't pastorally be present for somebody who has a different political point of view than you have, then you got to do something about your pastoral skills. And this is very notable. I think especially our younger rabbinical interns are in a very different political place than many of our members and how they feel. And I did a lot of work with our interns about how to be pastorally present for people with whom you might have very serious political differences, which is what is dividing so many communities right now. So that's the kind of personal check-in, making sure people are feeling heard, even if we can't. I have to say, I'm getting attacked all the time. Let's just be really clear. This isn't fun. I'm getting attacked by people in the congregation who think I'm too far to the left. I'm getting attacked by people in the congregation who feel like I'm being too far to the right. I have a congregant who is a rabbinical student who's leading a petition drive to get me to change my political positions on stuff. And, so I'm not presenting this that I've got it all solved. It is hard. We are in the middle of something so hard. I would say what we're in the middle of right now is harder than those three other things that I just described: AIDS, 9/11, and COVID. What we're in the middle of right now. And I think we all have to give ourselves kind of credit or permission to say we're in the middle of something that is really, really, really hard. And we have to deal with our own personal, trying to figure out what our own personal opinions are, what our own heartbreak is, what our own grief and anger or sadnesses are. And we have to take care of other people. That's really hard to do. A chaplain in a hospital is not typically an oncology patient. At the same time, they're going into an oncology ward to deal with somebody who's in tremendous pain, facing a terrible cancer diagnosis. What we're doing right now as clergy cannot be overstated about how hard it is and how hard it is to figure out where we are. I feel like I'm in the middle of a dark, I can't see exactly the way forward. It's not like I'm in a situation where I can say, I have the answer, just listen to me. I'm going to give a beautiful sermon. You're going to feel so much better, and we're going to move through to the other side. I feel like the best we can do is to express how difficult the moment is, to share honestly, and I do. The congregation knows very clearly what my own political perspectives are, what my own political drama is, what my own political my own political stuckness is. And I try to really be honest about those things, but not because I think I can solve it for people. I think we've also created a Psalms project. We have a history of doing that at CBST, also kind of going into the categories that I mentioned earlier, where we very quickly asked people to sign up for a Psalm so that we could try and cover all 150, so that every day the synagogue is reciting the entire book of Psalms. And again, I could say to people, it doesn't matter where your political perspectives are, you're reciting that Psalm for the hostages, for the Gaza innocent civilians, for the tragedy in the Middle East, but you are reciting the Psalm as part of a community, creating this daily recitation of the entire book of Tehillim. And you need to know, and you need to, when you say the Psalm, you think about the fact that you're one of, we actually have more than 150 signed up, so they're, duplicates. And we help people pick a Psalm, we help people get the translation if they're not Hebrew literate or comfortable. So that becomes a daily spiritual practice of the synagogue, regardless of anybody's political position. And I'm going to say, oops, did I just lose everybody? Oh, somehow my screen just went weirdly, whatever. Zoom did something. Okay, I'm back. So personal prayer, taking care of each other, like just on a basic level of saying we're brokenhearted, and then education. That other category. We've been doing town halls for CBST members every week since this happened, where I invite in people from Israel to Zoom in and talk about stuff from their perspective. So I take it out of who's right, who's wrong, and try to have the congregation get deeper and more thoughtful about listening to different kinds of people. I can't cover everybody. I get people who I'm connected to. So, and I ask people, and those are not about feelings, right? Like we have those sessions set up, which I think are important, where people can talk about their feelings, and that's really critical. But these sessions are in the category of trying to teach people stuff, deepen their understanding of a very complicated universe that, honestly, most of my congregants are not fluent in Israel-Palestine politics. They're very susceptible, I think, to some of the simplistic slogans that are out there on the left and on the right. And part of my goal is to complexify, make things more complicated for people, make people not think that they know everything. Like, I think that's an important. And so we've had 5 of these town halls. One was with a CBST member who was called back to Israel and is in Miluim as a paramedic, and had him just talk about what his experience is and what that's like for him. And he's a progressive gay guy, lives in New York, and now he's, in the IDF. And what does that mean for him? Somebody else who's a former CBST member who is very active in the democracy movement, who's now helping to organize the agricultural work in the fields that are now need to be harvested. And what's it like for him? What does he think? What's his perspective? What does he think? And people can ask these people what are their political solutions? How do they imagine it, et cetera, et cetera. So we've done 5 of those. And then in a couple of weeks, I'm going to teach a class for 4 sessions on the history of the Gaza-Israel issues. And that is also not going to be about feelings. I mean, we're creating containers for feelings, and then hopefully some containers for actually teaching information and helping people develop a sharper perspective. The last thing I'll say before I'll stop and we'll open it up for people to ask questions or to offer what you're thinking is that, how am I dealing with it personally? I have to say, not well. I mean, it is really hard. I'm not sleeping well. I'm not eating as well. But October 2nd, guess what I did on October 2nd? Yeah. I got a new puppy. This is Gracie. And let me just tell you something. Gracie's the angel that came to me on October 2nd. Amazing. So, I'm one of those people, it might be my generation. Oh, I see El Levy is here. She knows me well on this. I'm very bad on the self-care universe, okay? That's not my go-to. And I think that's where I'm good at praying. I'm good at reading all the blah, 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 blah. But how to figure out how to take care of myself, that's a really big challenge. And so the things that I've tried to be a little bit more conscious of that, and to just be aware. And it's really hard because every time I want to take time off, I just think of some people that I know personally who are in Israel. I think of people who are captive, and that's going to be our challenge. So I have to say, the way that I can get through that particular bleak spot of my weak personality is to say, if I'm going to be in this long term, I've got to take care of myself for those hostages, for those children, for Gaza, for Israel. And the last thing, so I'll say that I have a lot more to say about that, but I'm just going to say that as a category, and I'd love to hear how everybody else is doing that. And I take real inspiration from my colleagues. And I have to say, I have felt really isolated on a little island because I personally I don't feel comfortable with the perspectives either, obviously on the right, given this is a true call. And I'm not personally comfortable with the positions being taken on the far left. And I'm somebody who's been involved in progressive politics for a long time. And I've been taking very bad hits from the right for a long time. And it's very painful to realize that my home is no longer on the far left. And what does that mean for my own personal identity? And I start to realize there are a lot more of us than I thought. And I feel like I'm on an isolated island, but I don't think that's true. And that's been my spiritual work, to realize that my system of beliefs, my Jewish values from October 6th are still in place. And I still, I haven't been, those beliefs have to continue to be my moral compass. And I'm working, I have a small group of rabbinic colleagues that we meet regularly on Zoom and talk about these things and develop our ideas about it. And I think that's an essential part of what I'd call self-care, is to really work in the chevruta with other people where there's deep thinking and safety to really explore complicated ideas. So I don't really see what the future is easily. I don't think we're in a place where there's a list of actions that will get us someplace clean and pure. And I'm stunned in some ways and not stunned at all. For those of us who have been involved in Israel-Palestine issues for a long time, we recognize there's both evil in the world, which I think we in the progressive, especially Americans, let's face it, my experience is Americans always want a good guy and a bad guy. The good guy is always the weak and the innocent. The bad guy is always strong. And the bad guy, Americans want everything wrapped up in a 2-hour Hollywood movie, where the good guys win, the bad guys are vanquished, and you could leave the movie theater feeling very good about yourself. Look, that's not the world we're in. It's not real life. And part of our American Jewish culture has, I think, a little bit been too simplistic about good guys and bad guys too. And I say that about the left and the right. So I'm going to end there. I have a lot more to say, but those are the categories of work I've done at CBST. And I know if you want me to talk also, Jenna, about the issues about how I work with the board, things like that, I'm happy to go into that as well. But let me stop there so I don't talk too much.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much. I was just thinking maybe the future Trua event is an event where everyone brings their dog and pet and we, hold them up to the screen.
I did that at the beginning of COVID. We did all different Zoom groups. I said, we're having a fetch, don't kvetch Zoom. And everybody brought their dogs and introduced and some people brought their stuffed animals, but yes.
Mark your calendars.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we're going to pause the recording here so